Hi, everyone. Hello. Welcome back to this second part of the second portion of our workshop on dance and Parkinson's. And for the next hour and a bit, we are going to be talking about research, which is something that I am very fond of, and I'm really excited to talk about. We spent the morning exploring dance and different strategies of how to do movement with people with Parkinson's, but there is a lot of excellent research supporting why this is a good thing to do. I'm involved in some of this research. So I have a PhD. I did a postdoc at York University. My PhD is in dance studies, but I use neuroscience methods to understand the impacts of dance, not only for people with Parkinson's, but in all conditions, all people everywhere. So I also work at a community health center. So I understand the importance of being able to translate this information to people who work in healthcare. So I'd like you to wear a couple different hats. So I'm speaking here now to the people who are in this room and in the Zoom room training. If you are watching this later, this might not be relevant for you, but it's really important for us to be aware of the research that exists on dance and Parkinson's. And I also think the broader research on dance for a number of reasons. First, it's really inspiring. I find that understanding the research that happens gives me ideas as a group teacher, facilitator, leader, dance therapist, whatever hat I'm wearing. It helps me to think of ideas of how I can work with the group. What are the possible benefits and what are the mechanisms behind those benefits? And how can I, as someone, a movement professional, do something with those ideas in my class? Second, it's really important because if we want to work with people with a specific diagnosis, being able to talk to other professionals in healthcare and explain what we're doing in a way that makes sense to them can really help in terms of people being referred into our classes or raising awareness about our classes. So those are the two main things to keep in mind as we navigate through this world. And we're a small group here today, so I really invite anyone who wants to interrupt me and ask questions, feel free, but we will have discussion time at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to share slides. Okay, this is my really not very inspiring title slide, but I just thought we'd cut to the chase. We're going to talk about research, dance and Parkinson's. So as I said, some of the research I'm going to share with you is from the lab that I work with. So I also wanted to take a moment and just clarify a little bit of terminology. This is related to what we talked about this morning in terms of our contract, what are we doing with people. I love that you have been using this term dance for health here in Nova Scotia for quite a long time now. You were actually really ahead of the curve with that. It's a term that is now used globally. Did you know that, Elizabeth? You should have copywritten it. So there's a large organization called IADAMS, the International Association of Dance Medicine Science. They've been around for a long time, and they always focused on health for dancers. But in the last 3 years, they've started a whole dance for health segment that's actually pretty big. I actually just joined their Dance for Health committee. It's an international organization. And one of the things that they're doing that may be of interest for all of you to know is they're working on international benchmarking standards for programs such as this. And the idea is that it's not something that you absolutely have to adopt, but it's a system. They've interviewed hundreds of health professionals around the globe and asked what is important for you that is included in a dance and health program, and taken that information, and we're in the process of creating a benchmarking system so that if you are offering a class, you could submit it for independent review to see how many of these things are you hitting. You get some feedback like, hey, have you considered incorporating this or that into your class to improve it? It's not like a pass-fail thing. It's more along the lines of, in architecture, if you have a building, you can apply for LEED certification. And then if you get LEED's platinum certification, you can put that stamp on your building and everyone will know that you went above and beyond to meet the highest environmental standards. So it's that kind of thing. So anyway, according to IADAMS, they define dance and health as the holistic, evidence-based alternatives for the individual to manage and adapt to physical, mental, and social health challenges. In Dance for Health sessions, trained teaching artists engage people as dancers rather than patients in joyful, interactive, artistic activity. So I share that as IADAMS definition. Maybe it speaks to you, maybe it doesn't, but just so you know that this term is getting some traction globally. And if you want to have Dance for Health Nova Scotia have a slightly different definition, you should put it out there and put it on your website. I wanted to contrast too also dance therapy. I've also trained in dance therapy, as has Karen. It's a slightly different thing, but often in research studies, people will call all of it dance therapy. So it's good to be aware that there are slightly different approaches. Sometimes people talk about adapted dance as well. I also included applied dance in there, which is a term that I use and no one else uses. So don't worry too much about that one. But when you're reading a research study, if it says dance therapy or dance movement therapy, they may be talking about a specific psychotherapeutic movement practice. And it's just good to be able to differentiate between these terms. When you look at the methods section and look at what they actually did, you have a better sense of what happened in the session. Okay, so has anyone seen this picture or read this article before? Anyone seen this before? No? Okay, this was a few years ago. I think it was in the New York Times, but this is just an example of one of many stories that have come out in just the last couple of years where media has gotten really interested in the idea that dance has benefits for people. I don't like this term exercise, so I crossed it out. I said I changed it to human activity. But a lot of the wider attention is coming from the fact that there's been growing research into the effects of dance. So they say in the subtitle, research shows that dance offers a wealth of anti-aging benefits. It's also fun. As global population is aging, there's lots of things that people are looking for strategies to either reduce symptoms or prevalence of different neurodegenerative conditions, and dance is one of the things that has been shown to do that. So in the last 10 years, there's been a real explosion of research in dance. This is from PubMed a couple years ago, and you can see there was like the little green bars show like the number of research articles on dance. You can see for a very long time, like a century, there was almost nothing. And then in the last 10 to 20 years, there's been a huge exponential increase in research on the benefits of dance. So this is like really health-related benefits of dance. I'm going to just give a quick survey of some of the research that has contributed to this. And I will warn you, this is a very neuroscience heavy talk because that's my field of interest. So please feel free to ask me to go outside of that if you want. But I'm going to give you a quick overview of the dance neuroscience research because it's really, I believe, what has pushed this field forward. So 2005 was when one of the first articles came out. This was Stephen Brown had a paper on the neural basis of human dance, and it got covered in Time magazine as well. So he did a PET scan study to look at what was happening in people's brains as they were going through the motions of, it was specifically tango. One thing that's important to understand, a lot of the research up until very recently that has tried to look at what's happening with dance has had to get at it in indirect ways, because it's very hard to do brain imaging while people are moving through space. So this first study was a PET scan. So people were lying back, they had the PET scanner on, and they were sliding their feet on a board, but they were doing movements related to tango, specific patterns in space. They were listening to music. And because of the kind of question he asked, they played different kinds of music, and they had the movement fixed with the music or not. They had tango music that they messed with, so it didn't really sound like tango music. And they were trying to understand the relationship between the auditory to motor system. This is some of the first research. This is where it started. Around the same time, Beatriz Calvo-Moreno in the UK did a study, and she was looking at expert dancers who were watching dance. So she was saying what's happening, and she worked at this whole idea of action observation. So looking at what's happening in the brain of someone who already knows something at an expert level when they see it somewhere else. And so using expert dancers to make a model of what's happening when people dance. And then just a couple of years later, 2007, this is one of Hackney and Earhart's first paper. Madeline Hackney and Gavin Earhart started working with people with Parkinson's, specifically with tango. And a lot of their early research is really functional, looking at motor changes, looking at balance and things like this. But this was one of the first papers that came out, and then there's been a whole heap since then, looking at a dance form having benefits for people with Parkinson's. And I think something that's important to understand in all of this is that even now, there's no cure for Parkinson's. Someone who has this diagnosis, there's not a cure. So anything that is able to improve someone's quality of life, help them with some of the motor symptoms, this is a really big deal. So people got very excited about this. So tango, this is how tango got into the mix. We started doing research, this is from 2013, I think, on looking at expert dancers learning a dance. Some of the more recent stuff is looking at structural and functional differences with, and then there's been a whole bunch. So more and more people started taking this stuff from expert dancers and from the Parkinson's and looking at how can dance be neuroprotective for seniors more generally. And some of the models and reasons for that are what we're going to talk about in the next few minutes, half an hour. So I do a lot of this work with Joe D'Souza at York University. So right before I came into the lab, Paul Dami did this review article, pulling together a bunch of the research on what could pertain to dance. At this time, this was 2015, there was not a lot of research specific to dance. So they were looking at associated literature. So they looked at stuff from exercise science, they looked at stuff from music, because there's stuff in music. At this point in 2015, we knew exercise is good, we know there's benefits from music. And then they looked at some of the animal research, which was really interesting. One of the main ideas in this paper that I think is a really cool thing for us to think about, when you look at the exercise literature in animal models, with rats, for instance, with rats, you're able to look at really specific changes within the hippocampus. And one of the things that was intriguing from this that they brought in is that rats that exercise, if they're kept in a cage by themselves versus what is called an enriched environment, there's neuroplasticity in the hippocampus, but it doesn't persist. In an enriched environment, there's neurogenesis, there's the creation of new neurons that are kept over time. And I love the idea of thinking about what we do as providing an enriched environment, because an enriched environment for our rats means there's social opportunities, there are different kinds of physical challenges or different changes in the environment. It's not a bare and empty cage. And I think I love thinking about what we offer in terms of an experience as providing an enriched environment for the people that walk in. This is not a bare and empty cage. This is a space where we can have interactions with people, we can see other people, and we can interact in new and different ways. And this is another little model to think about. This is from a group in Germany that I'm going to share a bit of their research. Are people familiar with the term dual tasking? Dual task? Yes, I'm seeing some nods. So dual task is the cost of trying to do two things at once. And it's actually more about cost switching between different ideas that we pay attention to. This group in Germany that did some really nice work on neuroplasticity and dance proposed the idea that dance is a simultaneous motor cognitive training opportunity, where there are cognitive tasks that are embedded within the motor task. So for instance, when we were learning that motor sequence at the end, we had a cognitive task. We had to remember what our sequence was. We also had to be with the music and be with each other temporally. We were also paying attention to our friends on Zoom. And we were doing that while doing a motor task. It was completely embedded. It wasn't a distractor. It was part of what we were doing. And dance offers that in almost any form that we do, whether we're learning choreography or we're learning a folk form, even just we're exploring some aspect of our bodies, our relationship with gravity. We still have a cognitive idea that we're exploring through the motor system. And I think this is a really important model for how and why dance can be effective, and also why it's maybe different than other things that people might try. Are people familiar with the term neuroplasticity? No, yes, okay. So neuroplasticity, I really recommend Norman Doidge's books if you want a starting entry point to neuroplasticity. Norman Doidge, Canadian. He wrote a book called The Brain That Changes Itself, and he also has another book, a follow-up book called The Brain's Way of Healing, which I think is completely about dance, although he never mentions dance once. But you just pretend he's talking about dance and you will see there's a lot in there that you can use. But he really popularized or brought this idea to a popular audience, and it wasn't that long ago, maybe 10, 15 years ago, 20. I'm getting old, Karen. Yesterday. This idea of neuroplasticity is that your brain can constantly remodel itself in response to the things you experience in your life and in your environment. Prior to this, it was kind of thought that, the brain was fixed. We knew there was plasticity in development when kids were young, but we didn't know that it continued throughout life. And there's been research since that shows it continues right up until death. There's neuroplasticity. There are changes in the way that your brain functions, the way that different parts talk to each other. And this is very influenced by what we do. This is from the group in Germany, and they wanted to look specifically at the relationship between dance and neuroplasticity. And I'll show you some stuff from our lab that we did prior to this that was also around neuroplasticity. So neuroplasticity is a powerful model to think about what is happening when we work with dance. I like to use the term adaptive neuroplasticity. So the brain is always changing, but can we provide an experience that's helping the brain change in ways that is helpful to someone, that is going to maybe counteract some of the symptoms that they're struggling with as a result of having a progressive neurodegenerative illness. So this group in Germany did a very nice study. They compared people in a dance group versus people in an exercise group. And they wanted to see if there was any difference. They had a beautiful study design. They randomized people into two different groups. What is really interesting is if you look under training on this diagram, so they did the same barrage of tests to make sure their groups were matched. And then for the dance group met twice a week for 90 minutes for 6 months. They learned new dance routines every second week. They did arm-leg combinations, and they did spatial orientation. So this comes back to this idea of like, what is dance? What is newDance? So these were the things they decided were important for their study to look at. They made sure people were learning different things using upper and lower body and orienting in space. The exercise group met for the same amount of time, same frequency. They did endurance training on bicycles. And they alternated doing some strength and endurance. And they also did some flexibility training. So they did different things within the class, but what they were not doing is they were not learning different motor sequences, and they were not focused on spatial orientation. And I say this because you'll see there are differences between the groups, and those two key differences may be part of what is important. So if you're thinking about this as someone who's leading a class, you could think, maybe this is an important thing for me to include in my group. Orienting in space is something we definitely do in dance, but can we play with it a little bit more? Like even just when we did that last thing, we moved from the circle to something else. We started moving forwards and backwards. I gave you a directive to move across the room from one way to the other. Like there's lots of ways you can play with this. So the cool thing they found was there was a significant difference between the dance and sport group in something called BDNF, which is brain-derived neurotrophic factor. This is a key marker of neuroplasticity. So this is a biological marker indicating that the dance group had a greater degree of neuroplastic change than the exercise group did. Pretty cool, huh? Now, and they also looked in specific brain areas. They were looking for volume changes in the dance versus the sport group. And again, what's cool is they did this study for a long time. So the first bar sets are for 6 months and the second are for 18. So they saw changes in the precentral gyrus for the dance group, and you'll see it's very different for the exercise group, and also for the parahippocampal gyrus. These are important areas for navigation and memory. So there's something interesting that's happening here. You can see there's very little change in the physical exercise group. And if anything, it actually went down. The volume levels went down, which is also not unusual when you're talking about looking at older adults. But for the dance group, the volume increased, and significantly so. It's cool that they included the longer time period, because for the parahippocampal gyrus, they only saw this change at the 18-month mark. So this is also, there's a lot of questions around this. There's a group I work with at Wake Forest right now, and we're actually launching a randomized control trial to look at this question of frequency, duration, like what is the ultimate dose of dance? We don't know yet, but it's an important thing to think about. And when you're setting up your groups, thinking about how frequently you're going to meet, how much time you're going to dance, how long you're going to keep going. Okay, I switch gears. I'm going to talk a little bit. I have been involved with this lab now for 9 years. So I was not directly involved in all of the data collection and some of the earlier stuff I'm going to show you, but I have been playing with this stuff for a while now. So I'm happy to answer questions and go off topic if you want to ask anything about this. So this is a study that Joe did with Rachel in 2016. I think they collected the data in 2013. And this has been a really pivotal study for understanding what is happening when we dance. And I think it's contributed to some of the later research on neuroplasticity. Rachel Barr was a dancer, I think with Winnipeg Ballet before she came to York. And she was working with Joe, and they were somewhere and she heard the music for the Nutcracker came on, and she said, I could still do this dance. Like, it's so deep in me. And they started talking about this idea of muscle memory, which is something that dancers talk about. And Joe is a neuroscientist, and he's very literal, and he's like, muscles don't have memory. So he tried to figure out, what is this in terms of the brain? What does this mean? So they got this idea to look at what happens over time as people are learning a dance. They're learning a choreographed motor sequence. And they came up with a really interesting means of doing this. So this data I'm going to show you, we've done this with people who were healthy young dancers at National Ballet School and with people with Parkinson's. The paradigm is the same. The people are learning a dance over time. They're not learning the same dance. The ballet dancers are learning a ballet, and the people with Parkinson's were learning a modified dance. So there are 4 scanning sessions. The first session is before they learn the dance, and just to get a sense of what's happening. People are lying in an fMRI scanner. I don't know if you've ever had an fMRI, but it's like a big tube, big magnets. They're obviously not dancing, but to elicit that dance, they hear the music for a dance that they are learning. And they receive some training and instruction on when you hear the music, you're to imagine yourself dancing from a first-person perspective. And imagine going through the movements. And then they actually, once people got out of the scanner, they played the music and kind of tested them to see, like, you know, were they really imagining where they were in the movements? And this was based also on some of that earlier research I showed you from Calvin Moreno and others around the Action Observation Network, and the idea that when we imagine something, it includes some of the same brain areas as when we're actually doing it. So the first session, they don't know the dance. They hear the music and they're imagining moving to it, but they don't really have a dance that they're knowing yet. The second session, they know the dance, they've been learning it. The third session, they know it pretty well. And the fourth session, they're at performance level. They're performing it multiple times in a week. They really, really know this dance. So they looked at 2 areas, because we know there's an auditory input. We know there's going to be an auditory signal. And the other area is SMA, which is supplemental motor area. This is an area that's involved in putting motor sequences together. And they also did a localizer a foot localizer so they would know where it overlaps with the motor area. So this first line here, this is showing the signal from this area in SMA at the pre-training. This is at 1 week, so the signal's going up. And at 7 weeks, it's going up even more. Now, what's really cool is these people are lying in a scanner. They are doing exactly the same thing. Nothing has changed. They are still just lying in the scanner, but they're hearing music and they're imagining a sequence that over this time period, they are learning to a greater and greater extent. By this third scanning point, they know this sequence. What do you think happens at the next scanning point when they are performing it? Yeah. Those are both good guesses. And you both could be right in different ways. And actually, I'll show you some stuff we've looked at more recently. There's certain parts of SMA, it does go up. And there are certain parts that it does go down. So in the main part that we're looking at for this paper, it drops out at 34 weeks. And the reason for that they're proposing is that it's a sign that there's greater efficiency in the circuit. There's been a shift. There's been a plastic change in the brain. And it's maybe going to like more deeper subcortical areas are now doing the work. It's no longer up in SMA. They're not having time to think about it so much. So that idea of muscle memory or like, I know this, I'm doing it automatically is actually shown in this brain area, which is really, really cool. Yes, Karen's excited.
It's a lot of stuff that I knew about in 10 years.
Yeah, it's very cool. But what's awesome is they actually found a way of tracking this in the brain. Now, what's cool, they also saw some changes in some other areas that are associated with Parkinson's. So they decided to do the same study with people with Parkinson's, having them visualize their dance to see what would happen. Is there the same kind of plastic change? So again, with the people with Parkinson's, we see a gradual shift going up in the same area. And then for the final standing session for them in May, it was coming back down. So it was a similar kind of pattern as was seen in the expert dancers, which is indicating that even for people with Parkinson's, like very different stage of life, very different things going on. The people at the ballet school were like teenagers that were healthy brain-wise as well. You still see this plastic change. So that means that this motor sequence learning could elicit this plastic change throughout life, even in someone with a neurodegenerative condition. So this was very exciting work. I'm going to talk more about this kind of work towards the end, but is there any question about that at this point, or are we okay to keep going? Yeah. Yeah, well, this is great. This is one of the reasons I had wanted to work with this group. It's very cool. So also, Joe's been following people at Canada's National Ballet School for a long time now. And they also collect something called UPDRS, which I thought I should mention too, because in lots of other studies, but UPDRS is United Parkinson's Disease Rating Scale. It's something that's used to assess the severity of Parkinson's. Neurologists will use this. So they also collect UPDRS, and each one of these dots is showing a measurement from someone in the class. And this is over 3 years, showing what's happening with their UPDRS. And you can see there's variation, you know, it's not all the same. It's a heterogeneous group. But what is cool is after 3 years, when you average these points together, and those are not all the points, those are just some of the points, the slope of the line is almost flat. This is very unusual because normally this is UPDRS 3, which is the motor symptom severity for people with Parkinson's. Normally this line would go up. So like for instance, the controls in the top corner there, that's from Michael J. Fox. We took the same period of time, age matched and everything else. Carolina Bears did this for her PhD and looked at the difference. So the slope normally is going up, but for the people that are attending the dance program at the ballet school and also at Trinity, once a week, averaged together, the slope of their motor progression is almost flat. So this is really important. They published this last, what is this, 2021. You can read it, I can share it with you. I think I already shared this one with some people. So if you haven't read this and you'd like to, I'm happy to share it with you. But it got a lot of media attention too, because it's the only difference between these groups is that the ones that had the slower motor progression or almost no motor progression when they were averaged together were participating in this weekly dance class. So it was really making a difference to their symptoms. because this is not a brain injury, it's symptoms. Yes.
I have a question. So when I used to train therapy, we used to train in imagination. So if you were doing a test, did they ever test Parkinson's people that didn't actually physically ever learn to dance, but learned it in their imagination?
Only learned it in their imagination? No, but that's a cool idea. That's a very cool idea. Yes.
There's people in Vancouver who would be interested in doing that stuff.
Yeah.
Shannon Keependall is one. She did the work on dancers marking
Yes.
and the brain changes in it.
Yeah.
So I think there's like
Yeah.
probably less, like
We got a shirt.
could be the same.
Yeah. There's a lot to be picked apart in that. I did a study during my PhD on that. I had people learning a sequence and I also had them imagining the sequence to try to really pick apart what is the difference. We don't really know yet, but yeah, that would be a great question to ask. And you'd probably want to do it with healthy controls first, just to see, is there a difference between people who only do the dance in their imagination versus people who do it in real time?
Well, I'm also thinking on a therapeutic thing, like people that have compensatory patterns in their body that are adaptive to injuries or whatever, between, imagining maybe the proper way to
Yeah.
to do
What
it,
are
but then
what are they
not
imagining?
just like, has-
Yeah, there's a lot of really cool stuff to look at there. I mean, one of the takeaways I take from this kind of work, in teaching a class is also, for someone who's sitting out or who doesn't want to do something, I always say, you're welcome to just watch the movement or imagine doing the movement, because there are benefits to watching and imagining as well as moving. We don't know to what degree the difference is, but there still is some benefit to watching and imagining if you can't or don't feel like doing the movement fully in space. Yeah, so you can find that's published, and I can share that with Karen, who can share it with you if you'd like to read it. Some of the other things that we've measured in our lab and other people measure as well that I thought I should mention if you're going to read research, there's different balance scales. There's the Berg. FAB is also used, Fullerton Advanced Balance Scale. TUG is timed up and go. That's the amount of time it takes someone to get from a chair up and walking through space. We've seen improvements on all of these measures, and most people who've measured these in studies have also seen improvements on these measures. So this is something you might want to keep an eye out for if you're reading research. And we've also measured UPDRS after a single dance class, just before and after. There's an improvement right before and after. And in doing a more of an intensive format where people were dancing every day for 2 weeks, there was an improvement in that scale as well. Another thing that we've looked at are affective differences. So this is like mood. So there's the PANAS-X is one of the ways that we've measured this. And something else that we've noticed across time in pretty much all the groups, and other people have done this as well, is that there is a decrease in negative affect and an increase in positive affect from before and after class. So basically PANAS-X has like a bunch of words, and you say like how you're feeling, circle the words that you feel, and they have either a positive or negative connotation. And people basically circled more positive words after than they did before, less negative words after than they did before. We did a little study during COVID to see if this also worked for people who were only dancing online. And it did. We had the same kind of trend. We saw a decrease in negative, increase in positive, and that was for people who were dancing online in Zoom classes. And other people have also done a lot of research on the benefits of people doing classes during the pandemic, also found lots of positive things. And that's been really interesting and instructive, because I know a few years ago, someone asked me if I would do dance through telehealth. And I was like, no, that will never work. That just won't work at all. But being forced to do it over this pandemic time, a lot of us found that it is really helpful. And I would definitely encourage you to explore it if it's something that interests you, either doing a hybrid thing like we've done today, or doing just a straight up Zoom class. It's great in terms of being able to give people access to something, especially if you're in an area that's rural or really spread out. It could also be something that's an adjunct thing. So maybe you live somewhere and it makes sense for people to come together once a month And in between, you're doing sessions on Zoom, so you're still building community, you're still giving people a chance to dance. There are also tons of classes already on Zoom, which can be a great resource for all of you if you're looking for ideas of what to do in a class or how a class could be structured. Okay, one other thing I'll tell you about, this was some of the work I did in my postdoc. We looked at what was happening in a specific brain area and tried to correlate it with some of the mood stuff. So we're pulling together some data. So GDS is Geriatric Depression Scale. And this is something that we saw people, again, were having lower scores on the geriatric depression scale after dancing. So this was a measure indicating that their depression may be less. So we picked a seed region in CG25, which is an area of the brain that's part of the depression network. And we looked over time to see if there was a change in signal, and there was. So this is similar setup as we did before when people are in the scanner, they're remembering their dance, they're going through. So nothing is changing externally, but the signal from this area is decreasing, which literature has shown is associated with lower feelings of reflection. So we did a correlation, and there was a very nice correlation between the change on GDS and the change in the signal from this area over time. So we just submitted this. I don't know if it's going to get published. It's under review. But this is some work from our lab, and other people are trying to do this too. It's like, how can we make a relationship between what we can get in terms of neuroimaging data and an actual behavioral signal, and then link it back to what's happening in the dance program. So really trying to show that there's a biological change that leads to symptom improvement for people as a result of participating in dance. I was just going to share, I also work with these guys in North Carolina. They're the ones who are doing the randomized control trial looking at dance dose. And a couple of things, ideas that they have been looking at that I think are really cool to know about. They do they call it verbal auditory cueing. They work a lot with improvisation. So this is the idea of just telling people, like, explore this, move your arm, move your leg, like really eliciting improvisation from people. And in their first study, they saw some really nice changes on the Fullerton Advanced Balance Scale, but cooler than that, they saw these changes in integration of the basal ganglia with other areas in the brain. This was after an intensive, like, people were dancing every day, and it was a case study, but it still was a really nice, and one of the only other examples where we have people are dancing and we see a brain-based biological change. And the basal ganglia being more integrated is really important for people with Parkinson's. So I wanted to go down and work with these people, and I did for a while, and this is from their pilot data. They also saw changes in connectivity in the somatomotor network and in the default mode that correlated with improvements in balance and a decrease in behavioral and mood symptoms and an increase in quality of life across the board. So people are working on doing this, and I think it's really exciting for all of us who are interested in doing this work. This is also pilot data from a randomized control trial that they just completed, where they tried to isolate some of the aspects of dance. So it was, there were 4 groups. It was a factorial design. So they had the normal group, we'll call it the normal group, was the dance movement group. And this was people getting together as we did today, moving together in real time with a teacher. So that group included dance and a social component, and it was improvised. Then they had people who were in the movement alone group. So they were in a room by themselves with no teacher, no one else. There's no social aspect anymore, but they're getting the same verbal instructions. So they could have the same movement experience, and they had music and everything, but they didn't have a group. And then we also had a social group where we tried to replicate the social part, but no dance. So we got together and we played improvisational party games. So it was still creative, still responding to things, but we're not moving through space. And the idea was to compare between these groups to see if they're really, what was the contribution of improvisation? What was the contribution of having a social component? So far, we actually haven't gotten anything conclusive out of that data, which is also interesting. Important to say when things don't work. We were at a conference and someone said, that the problem was the control group was too good, because the social games group was still having so many of the aspects of the dance group that even though we weren't moving through space, there was so much creativity involved, and we were still doing some fine motor skills and things like this because we were building towers and things. So anyway, it's hard to come up with a control for dance. That's a larger research problem that I love to talk about, and we can talk about some other time. But anyway, what they did find in the pilot data that is exciting and interesting, and this is with people with early stage dementia. So this is not Parkinson's, these are people with MCI and their care partners, is that there was a shift towards greater scaled inclusivity within the somatomotor cortex. So that's, again, this idea of integration, the better integration. And there's also an increase in something called global efficiency, which is like the path length between brain areas. So that was the communication between different brain areas was enhanced after the dance intervention. One of the last things I was just going to mention, and I really recommend this study. This is Chechi's study. So if you haven't read it, again, maybe Karen can share it with you.
It was in the study set.
Okay, so you guys have shared it. This idea of feeling lovely was something that Chechi was really interested in. She did a really beautiful study where she did a comparison between people who were in a Dance for Parkinson's program versus she took away the dance. She tried to take away the dance. She had people moving to a metronome and going through the same range of motion. And she's a CMA. She used her Laban super skills to create a movement, pattern movement progression that was very similar to what people did in the dance class, but there was no music, there was no social, there was no imagery, there was not the sense of beauty, and comparing these two groups. And she looked at something called skin conductance levels, which is associated with, again, emotion and positive affect. And the people who were in the dance program had higher general positive affect, and their skin conductance levels were also correlating with that in a really nice way that the people in the matched intensity exercise were not. And she also used this thing called body self-efficacy. And I think this is a really important idea too. Body self-efficacy scale measures a person's sense of being capable of doing something. I am efficacious in doing something. So the people in the dance program afterwards had a higher sense of body self-efficacy than people who were just in the movement group. So again, there was something within that dance environment that gave people that sense of success, so that they left feeling like, I am capable of doing things. She also looked at beauty, which was a really nice thing to look at, in the sense of feeling beautiful in one's movement. Anyway, lovely study to read. So I'm coming to my wrap-up slide now. We're almost done, and then we'll have questions and a conversation if you're still here. This is from Carolina's thesis. Carolina did that nice study where they were looking at the longitudinal UPDRS over time. And she made this nice slide to bring together a whole bunch of the things that go into dance, like duration, intensity, complexity, the different responses in the brain. So whether we're looking at different neurotransmitters, neurogenesis, like different kinds of factors we can look at, and then how those are related to different adaptive mechanisms. Are they neuroprotective? Is it neurogenerative? Is it something to do with increased synaptic transmission? And she pulled all of this together because these are the kinds of things that we're working on, a kind of comprehensive model. What is going on when we dance? How are we supporting brain health? How are we supporting people even before they have a diagnosis of something? What are the benefits of participating in dance? And this is super fresh. This is what we're working on this week. Joe did a whole bunch of new analysis, which I was really excited about. But we're trying to look at, this is a model of all the different brain areas that are potentially involved in dance and looking at the contribution of them over time. The one on the right, I'm really excited about because I was bugging Joe for a while. I wanted to look at VTA, which is ventral tegmental area, because this is an area that's really associated with reward, with the reward network. And it's something that people have been hypothesizing for a while now. How is dance associated with reward? And reward in the brain has to do with dopamine. And dopamine dysfunction is really a big part of what happens in Parkinson's. But dopamine is enhanced by learning, and it's very related to learning. I really invite you to think about, no matter what you are doing in your class, what are the aspects of learning that are involved? And this doesn't necessarily have to be learning a sequence. It can be learning a skill. It can be learning the body better. There's all kinds of learning that happens in dance. There's also reward mechanisms to do with using music, because reward can be very temporal. So even knowing that we're doing a movement and it ends at this time, at this place, this can be something that can trigger the reward system. So I'm really interested to think about how dance can interact with the reward system and whether that is a really important mechanism of some of the changes that we are seeing. So to be continued is what we're working on now. And this is our big idea that we're working on in our lab, that dance promotes adaptive plasticity in health and disease. We've worked on it in a bunch of different ways. I'm happy to talk about those more if anyone is still with me. And just to say, I talked about a bunch of research that I do with a bunch of different people. So thank you to all of them. And thank you to you for being here and listening and being interested in research. And I will stop sharing and we can maybe talk and have some questions. Are you guys still here? Are you still awake? Yay! Okay. Does anyone have, yes?
So I know that you cannot cure Parkinson,
Mm-hmm.
but you mentioned in dementia, when you have dementia, you can kind of build those connections in the brain again. Does that mean that people with dementia have even more benefits? No.
No, I mean, dementia is also neurodegenerative. And I will say, this is just from my own experience of working with people, sometimes that can be even faster than people with Parkinson's. What we can try to do is provide strategies to support what's there and possibly slow down, maybe, but we don't know to what extent that's possible. I think what is cool is that in the people with MCI, like the people with Parkinson's, you would expect the changes to be going in a particular direction. And the fact we can see that there's a shift that seems that is towards greater integration, that does seem really positive, but we don't have any evidence that we could actually turn it around.
What I observed in the class with the people with dementia is sort of two things happen. One is their affect really does increase. They really are better off, they're much more organized and present, and the color of their face is better, etc. And I've also seen it happen that they get more discouraged or agitated as the class goes on, because they can't do the things necessarily that they could do, or they're feeling flooded or something, so both things happen. And you really can't predict what's going to happen in the class. So we just feel, sometimes people need to sit out for a bit, a little flooded, or move to the side, dance by themselves. What happens?
I think that question also points back to the question that I brought up earlier. I'd like to repeat because it came from our participants. It's one thing to talk about them participating in the program, dance program. But their question was, how could they participate in creating some benefit to the research? Have you an answer to that?
Yes, I do. We need more research.
Well, we have obviously do the research, but is there some follow-up questionnaires, feedback?
For sure. I mean, so there are a couple of things. There's research is happening all the time. And there have been, especially since COVID, a lot more people doing questionnaires or doing research online. So if you have people in your group who are interested in supporting research, I think that's a really great option to give people. And maybe as part of this project, you could have a list that people could sign up. Are you interested in participating in a research study? Sign up here. And if that list gets shared with researchers, there are lots of researchers who are like, I need more people to ask these questions to. So I think that that's definitely a potential thing, that we could create a base of potential participants that people know are here.
So you don't, you can see that as a whole second, phase of research where you now follow up with people who participated and you broaden that base of contacts. But is there anything, and maybe it's more of a question for Dance Nova Scotia directly, is there a way as part of this project to include a final after the fact of a class? I don't know, yours seems to carry on, Karen, so maybe you don't have it in, but where we've done a 7-week program, there's this sense that, once we finish it, that would be a moment when maybe someone would talk to them or listen or whatever.
Mhm.
And
We just put in a page-friendly follow-up to do exactly that.
okay, so we can at least make that and
Yes.
tell people. I would like to say money.
If we get the money.
Along these lines, and it has to be set up and so forth. Obviously, there's steps, but at least to say that this is a pending next.
And if people are interested in other, so when we did the first 10-week, that was a New Horizons grant. We actually hired Elizabeth to do the final report, and she interviewed people, and there's a beautiful document. We send it to you.
I'd like that.
In which, and you can see that in this document, you can see why they were asking for more.
Right.
Like this, they didn't want this to be over. So,
That would be very helpful.
yeah, that's really helpful. I will say that when we did get the grant, I spent a lot of time with researchers at Dalhousie trying to get them to do data analysis and or, any of these kinds of studies. Because we had a group here and they stopped returning. They were very excited at first, but it was just too much. Stopped returning phone calls. They stopped showing up.
Yeah.
It was very discouraging.
And
The
just
problem, just want to, I won't say, go ahead. I was about to hire a research.
So let me just ask them, I have a few other questions. Margaret, if you could help me with this. But in the anthroposophical world, which is another worldview, but talks about developing sensory awareness, I've been really struck that the first sort of early senses that a young child learns, and there's typically 4 that are mentioned: a sense of well-being, a sense of movement, a sense of balance,
Sense of touch.
and sense of touch. So these seem to be the same senses that are compromised with these various neurological conditions. And I find that actually quite fascinating. And I mentioned it at one point in our class. It was so clear that these were the senses that we were trying to build more awareness, more confidence, a better relationship, and so forth. And I kind of brought that out. These are the very senses we learn earliest as a young child. And one of the people in the class was moved to tears to hear that. She said that is so moving, which I thought spoke volumes. So I think there's some really interesting research potential making that late, and all the old adages too, like the old person, or kind of as you become more physically decrepit, it is kind of like you're reverting to a young child type, even to all the horrors of having to wear diapers as an adult again. Like there's some interesting parallels about what we've learned early, and then as we lose that and have to relearn it or reactivate it. So I don't know. I would be surprised if that's already occurred to some of this research, but if it has, I'd love to hear about it. If it hasn't, I'd like to invite you to take that idea forward.
It sounds like you have a very good hypothesis there.
Yeah,
Hypothesis to explore.
Right. So then another one is, I was very interested in, earlier you mentioned what I thought was fascinating. It relates to this, whether there's a cure or not. Actually, 2 parts to this question. So let me first ask, the fact that there's no cure, could carry the implication that we know very clearly what Parkinson's is, and we just don't have a cure for it. I have the little bit I read, I don't have that impression. I have the impression that there isn't all that clear a diagnosis. There's kind of a seeming to be a conglomeration of possible things that kind of relate, that suggest and I'm wondering if to say there's no cure, I mean, obviously, if we don't know what it is, we can't name the cure. You know, like there could be a kind of cart before the horse thing going on there that might be worth untangling a wee bit. And I just offer that. But then the more interesting thing to me is that you would then went on and said, even without a cure, there's clear evidence that there's a preventative benefit. And I went, whoa, that sounds like the quintessential underlying thing that our whole healthcare system is going through right now. We've been so focused on trying to cure or react to situations that we don't really understand. But you know, that's been the bias. How do we cure it? How do we fix it? The idea that we could promote health by preventing, but if that's trying to be married to a medical system that doesn't understand that, there's a whole bigger ramification, I think.
Well, I'm very glad you brought that up. I will add, so I work in a community health center. And right now, we just said our focus going forward next year is on preventative. It's so important. By the time, so there are clear markers for Parkinson's, and by the time someone has a diagnosis of Parkinson's, there's been, I think, something like 90% of dopamine producing neurons in the substantia nigra are already lost.
Yeah, that does seem to be the most consistent.
That's the most consistent, and that's like an imaging-based diagnosis that can be confirmed. Now, there are a host of Parkinsonian-like conditions. And it's true, none of these things are completely, thoroughly, you know, boom, we understand everything about it. But we can say that what we do understand about this condition called Parkinson's is that there's a loss of dopamine producing neurons, and that's going to affect mood, movement, and it's progressive. And once it starts, it keeps going in the same direction. But once the person has a diagnosis, at that point, it's quite progressed in this phase. And there are many, many steps earlier on where we could support, intervene, and potentially slow down. I think one of the other interesting areas of research that I would love to see take off is more looking at how can we look at the interactions between the allopathic things we have, like L-DOPA, for instance, and something like a Dance for Health program. So can someone who is in a program like this prolong the amount of time that they can be on a lower dose of L-DOPA? Or can they prolong the amount of time before they have to start taking it in the first place? Like, are we able to slow that down to some extent? And I'd love to see some interaction effect research. But yes, the bigger thing is if we can sort of get people to understand that there's things that you can do prior to having a diagnosis that could really give you 5 or 10 years more of having a very different kind of life. Like, I think that's such an important message for people to hear.
I was just gonna say, like, how we got in touch with like massage therapists, because you know, I found it really helpful to have people that I treat as massage therapy clients that come to my class, because it absolutely goes together. And I was just wondering if, you know, there's already preventative health practitioners out there that would probably be very happy to do research with you. And the other thing, the other question I had was, have you looked at Joe Dispenza's research on, you know, meditation and things, the serotonin, dopamine, and all that, like, because he does the brain scanning with all of his work as well. So it might be another interesting crossover where they already have research on that you could put together.
This is great. You guys are thinking like researchers. That was the goal. Excellent. That's a really good thought. So, I mean, and that's a good example of, I remember the paper I showed at the beginning where I said, you know, there's not that much specifically on dance. I looked at music, I looked at exercise. Mindfulness and meditation is another thing that, like, well, that's an aspect of what we do. what can the research from that area tell us?
Well, there's also research on fascia, which I look at a lot to teach about that, and the unwinding, where you're moving in space, is a body memory type of work. And they actually have done quite a lot of research on that, which I also think would be quite well.
I think that would be awesome. So this is wonderful. And this is one of the reasons I like to come and talk about research to people from different fields, because I think this is so multifaceted what we do here. It is not one thing, it's a lot of things. And the way that each one of you is going to do it is also going to be different. You're going to turn up the volume on different things. You understand something about fascia and the body from your background. You're going to bring that into how you're working with people. And you know, others of you are going to bring different things. So I'm very excited to see what you create here based on bringing these things together. And I hope you will continue to share with each other and like have a research club too, share stuff, you know, bring something in and be like, hey, you know, that idea I said about fascia, here's some research about it. And it really got me thinking about this thing I do with people that seems to help them. Let's talk about it. I think that's where the you know, the rubber hits the road. Like the research, it's great if it sits around in journals, you know, some people read it, but it needs people to apply it.
Well, I think also in massage therapy, we have similar issues in doing research because I'm a practitioner, client thinking different. But I think you can see case studies, like even with single people or single class case study, and those are actually somewhat helpful in the field to have. So if we had wanted to put together a case study format that we kind of filled in, that could be helpful.
Yes.
That's the project, that's the proposal.
That's the proposal. So you guys have a funding proposal. Research can be, I think research is wonderful. There are many challenges with research. I mean, one is it takes time and resources. So you need to get funding applications. You need to have an ethics review board. So you need to have someone making sure your research is ethical. So whether you partner with a hospital, a university, a researcher, you create your own Dance Nova Scotia ethics review board. There's lots of ways to do this, but things to get you through these things. But I do really encourage you to make thinking about research at the very least an aspect of how this grows, because this is how you can interface with other professionals. This is how you can get people excited about the work. This is how you can grow the evidence base. So like Karen was saying, reaching out to people at Dalhousie, telling them about what you're doing, you know, hopefully someone at some point says, yeah, I do want to research that. Or you can find people who are already doing research and kind of draw them into your world. And people do get excited. I think that's really important to note too, that people who are doing these programs do get excited about, can we contribute to the knowledge base here? Can, you know, my experience be something that helps people understand what's going on?
Well, it carries that emotional potential affirmation for them, especially if they're feeling somewhat devalued as a functioning human being.
Yeah.
If they feel that at least there could be that knowledge benefit, but that others, you know, then it is a way to feel good about what they can be part of.
And I will say it's shifting. Like from being associated with a couple groups who've been doing this for a long time. I know when Joe was first doing this work, like people, like he felt like nobody took it seriously. Like, you're doing dance, like why would you do that? The group in Wake Forest, their first RCT that they put through in 2016, 2017, really hard to get it reviewed and all the way and funded. The next one they put in, it went through a lot easier because there's more and more research supporting this. People are paying attention. And it's also the kind of thing that makes a difference as to whether someone's neurologist or doctor would be like, hey, have you heard of trying dance? Like, this is something that might help you. You know, and that makes a big difference too, in terms of having different kinds of people participate in your class. If it's a doctor or someone who's referring them or suggesting that they try it, that can make a big difference.
You invited us to circulate. Did that happen? I mean,
I don't know if anybody did.
Well, I thought, and I thought, how am I supposed to do that? I really.
Well, we all, you know,
I can't call up my doctor to get in when I'm sick.
Well, let's see. We are recording this, so maybe some health people are watching this at a later date.
Okay.
If you're watching this, health person, thank you for being here. We hope you're listening. We hope you're still awake.
I can send it to the lab, Dalhousie, and the people at Dalhousie who are doing the research on dance. So we'll see. What
I think it's great, I like.
yeah, great. Well, what I've come to understand is that from the guys who are in the class, is that they get the diagnosis and then they get referred to this particular lab, which is at Dalhousie, and there's one neurologist who has a private practice, and you wait 6 months to see that person. He's about to retire, and nobody knows,
Yeah.
it's an old story here in Nova Scotia.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that it couldn't happen differently. And one of the conversations that we have to have is with Dalhousie. So they have the medical school, they have the researchers, they have the neuroscientists. They should have somebody.
Well, they have Chico.
I need a faculty job.
They have
If you're
Chico.
watching this, Dalhousie.
The hospital has Chico, and like that much of a stretch to offer it. And,
Yeah.
Not you did a fellowship there, right?
Yeah, I did a fellowship in the department. It was in storytelling,
I see,
excuse me, and dance,
yeah.
dance stories.
There's a hand up in the Zoom world. Olivia.
Hi, thanks for all that awesome research. That was great. So I one of my questions was about what you did answer about Zoom. So that was really good to hear that like Zoom, I was curious, is the Zoom translating well for people? And it seems to be translating really well just today being here too. So yeah, that was really good to hear. And then the other thing was, like, I know things are always shifting, and I know, Karen, you had mentioned you still wear masks so that everybody, who's immunocompromised feels safe being there. I'm just wondering if there's any research on like the mask use, and like also if we're still required I don't know how the rules are, not even so much the rules, but what people's comfort levels are for running these classes and what other people are doing right now with the distance and masking.
There's somebody in our lab did a little research study on how the masks affected people's ability to perceive affect and things in the class. I can't remember what they found out. I think they had a very small sample size because we couldn't find people to participate.
Yeah.
Nice to have a resume. In terms of the masking, I mean, people, if anyone wants to share, I can just say for me, I work in a community health center and we are classified as a hospital. So we actually have to wear masks.
Yeah.
But here we don't have to, but we particularly ask the class, if anybody feels the need to wear a mask, everybody has to. So it's
yes. So you leave it kind of open to, like, I would wear one obviously, but I just mean, like, I wonder what some people, like I was speaking to someone the other day who was interested in my class in January, and they were still really scared of like going out, like they haven't left their house much or whatever, and we're wondering if everyone would wear, like there's still people wondering that kind of stuff. So I didn't know, like, but then there's some people who can't wear them for their own health reasons, so, or don't feel comfortable too. So do you have some folks in the class who don't wear them? I'm just trying to picture how I can say this to people and what people's comfort level might be.
I ask every once in a while, I'll say, are we okay taking masks off? And half the class will say please, and somebody, one person says no, you keep them on.
Okay. So if people want to, you just, yeah. And then with terms of space, like there's allowed to be some physical touch. I don't know how these things are running right now or how the classes are expected to run.
The class has got a lot of vulnerable people in it. And so we do touch sometimes, and we ask permission each time. And we're wearing masks, and we will go up to somebody and we'll say, permission to touch, put hands on, and they have to say yes before we touch them.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure because I know it's, we're kind of.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I also do things like we did that little tango thing earlier, and I said, with your partner, you can decide how close or far you want to be. I mean,
yeah,
there are parameters around that, but I think you just have to go. I know one of our sites in Toronto, Sarah Robichaud's class, she's having people rapid test before class.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to make sure when I run it that I'm doing it like, you know, the way we're supposed to do it.
I would recommend you continue to follow whatever your health recommendations are for the province, and just keep an eye on things for your area and check in with people about what they need and what they're comfortable with. And also you may need to follow the rules of whatever building you're using.